For more than 45 years, my life has been shaped by a growing encounter with that hidden dimension of existence we call the sacred. An interior call to awakening, to inner transformation, and to the living presence that shines through all traditions when they are rightly understood and practiced. Out of decades of experience, research, and inner work, a book has finally emerged that attempts to honor that encounter and to clarify one of its important modern expressions. It is entitled The Spiritual Origins of the Fourth Way, Reuniting the Lost Fragments of a Sacred Teaching. The work is appearing both in English and in a complete French translation, in hardcover and in paperback, so that seekers in different languages and lands may enter into the same exploration. In many ways, this book is the culmination of a lifetime journey, a long pilgrimage through the ideas of Gurdjieff and Uspensky, through the writings of the mystics, and into the living heart of inner Christianity. What I offer you here is not theory, but the distilled fruit of that journey. What I would like to do now is invite you into the heart of this work. In what follows, you will hear the preface to this new book, the story of how these questions arose, how the fragments slowly began to come together, and why I believe this teaching must be reunited with its deeper spiritual source. So let us begin with the preface to the Spiritual Origins of the Fourth Way, Reuniting the Lost Fragments of a Sacred Teaching. This book bears a double claim. First, that the Fourth Way, so often received as a freestanding, modern esoteric psychology, grew from older soil than most of its heirs imagine. Second, that the most life-giving path forward is not to replace the work, but to reunite it with the sacred stream that first nourished it. Hence the title's two phrases, Spiritual Origins and Lost Fragments. The work as we know it arrived brilliant and usable, its instruments exact, its sobriety refreshing, its analyses of mechanical life devastatingly true. Yet the fragments were handed to the West largely separated from their mother tongue, the Neptic and Hesychast tradition of Eastern Christianity, whose grammar of the heart, watchfulness, compunction, thanksgiving, and theosis once gave those same instruments their aim and warmth. By fragments, I do not mean errors. I mean essentials in need of context. Self-observation without watchfulness becomes self-absorption. Non-identification without sobriety becomes cool detachment. External considering without charity becomes social technique. Payment without mercy becomes a theater of severity. Reunited with their spiritual origins, these same practices recover their purpose. Self-observation is recognized as the ancient philake kardias, the watch of the heart. Non-identification reveals its kinship with nepsis, the refusal to dialogue with a thought until it rules. External considering discloses its original face as concrete love of the neighbor. Conscious labor and intentional suffering cease to be feats of self-mastery and reappear as podvig, cooperation with grace for the sake of becoming human in love. There is biographical warrant for speaking this way. From childhood, J.I. Gurdjieff was formed within an Eastern Christian world of feasts and fasts, Armenian and Greek chant, and the ordinary reverence of village piety. Most decisive was the presence of a respected Orthodox cleric, remembered in tradition as Dean Borsch, whose counsel and example helped shape the boy's moral and spiritual imagination. However far Gurdjieff later ranged through the languages and lore of Asia Minor, the adolescent soil beneath his feet was Orthodox and Eastern, and the elder's imprint remained. In later reflections remembered by Boris Muraviev, Gurdjieff suggested that the Western intelligentsia of his day was not ready to hear Christianity on its own terms. He therefore chose a different grammar, technical, psychologically exact, and light on explicit dogma, so that modern men and women might begin the work without choking on church words. The decision gave the Fourth Way an extraordinary reach. It also exacted a cost, for what was implicit in him easily became invisible to us. Gurdjieff's own pages betray the depth of his reverence. In Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, he speaks, however playfully, of a most holy Son Absolute, of a common Father Creator, and of a universe whose lawful motions demand gratitude and service. Behind the satire runs an austere piety, creation as gift, man as debtor, and being part-log duty, as worship translated into effort. The outer vocabulary may be de-churchified, the inner posture is recognizably religious. Nor is the case only Gurdjieff's. P.D. Uspensky's classic first bore the working title Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, an honest confession that what reached London and New York were pieces of a larger whole. In his final years, by multiple student accounts, Uspensky told seekers to go to Mount Athos to find the original teaching, and maintained a friendship with Father Nikon that reinforced this orientation. Recent testimonies likewise note that Gurdjieff himself quietly pointed certain pupils in the same direction, Aubrey Walton among them, as well as several students in Paris, recommending Athos as a place where the work's inner grammar survives in its native liturgy of watchfulness and mercy. These threads do not prove a thesis by footnote, they illuminate what the teaching's structure already suggests. The work's most powerful instruments rhyme with the desert's original psychology of salvation. In these pages, we invite you to a journey of reassembly and revelation. The teachings of the Fourth Way, often encountered in fragments and glimpses, are here brought together into a cohesive whole. We explore the path to real I and to theosis, divine union, not as isolated doctrines, but as an integrated spiritual roadmap. Chapter by chapter, we show how the lost fragments of Goethe's teaching can be reassembled within their living Orthodox context, offering modern seekers a practicable way toward inner transformation and the recovery of a sacred, holistic vision. This reassembly is not cosmetic. It reorders aim. The end is not personal ascendancy, but communion, attention warmed into prayer, effort ripened into love. It must also be said why such reassembly is urgent. A grave deviation has occurred wherever the fourth way has been severed from the path of theosis and union with the divine. Detached from its sacred matrix, the work easily degenerates into an ideology of self-development or a power game of schools. Over the last 50 years, this vacuum has too often been filled by predatory, self-appointed teachers who trade on secrecy, extract payment without mercy, and leave damaged lives in their wake. Reuniting the work with its spiritual origins names both a healing and a safeguard, authority tempered by eldership, formats embedded in charity, and practices measured by humility, repentance, and concrete service. Two theological ideas especially restore aim and keep fantasy at bay. The first is metanoia, not a mood of guilt, but a turning of the whole person toward reality, away from fascination with the self. The second is theosis, deification, participation in the life of God by grace. The Fathers guard this participation with a distinction. God's essence remains beyond all grasp. God's energies, the living self-giving by which He creates, illumines, forgives, and heals, are truly shareable. Light from the sun is not the sun's core, yet is the sun's own light, warming and seeing us into being. Under this horizon, higher states cease to be private trophies. They are visitations measured by humility, tenderness, and service. And the fourth way's deep longings, access to higher centers, the birth of real I, the passage from fragmentation to unity, are reframed as communion rather than conquest. The unification we seek is not the enthronement of a solitary self. It is the flowering of personhood in relationship, transparent, obedient, and free. Why insist on origins now? Because our age has perfected distraction and monetized grievance. Any practice that trains attention and contrition is already a public good. But attention cut loose from a sacred aim can become an asceticism of presence. Contrition cut loose from mercy can become a performance of severity. Returning to the sources corrects both. The Church's older wisdom treats the human being not as a project to be optimized, but as a person to be healed. The sacraments, so often misunderstood as badges, are medicine. Confession is not theater, but surgery that frees the heart from secrecy. Almsgiving is not sentiment, but warfare against the tyranny of the self. Fasting is not contempt for the body, but its education in freedom. A calendar of feasts and fasts provides the formats and shocks the work knows we need. but places them inside thanksgiving and love. The reader wary of religion deserves a clear word. You will find no bait and switch here. The fourth way as craft remains intact. Gather sensation. Observe without judgment. Do not express negative emotion. Repair quickly. Remember aim. Pay in advance. This book simply restores their original climate. Under that climate, the exercises are not ends in themselves. Attention is gathered in order to be offered. Non-identification is practiced to make room for mercy. Payment is rendered so that reconciliation has the energy it requires. The lonely hero of esotericism yields to the apprenticeship of love. What follows is, in the end, an act of recovery. We are reclaiming what Gurdjieff truly came to offer, an inner work ordered to reverence, mercy, and transformation, much of which the first generation after him could not fully hear once the fragments were severed from their living source. He himself signaled that his message was for later ears, to his grandson, and it is to that intended posterity that this book is addressed. A generation capable of reuniting the work with its spiritual origins, so that attention becomes prayer, effort becomes love, and the teaching at last speaks in its whole voice.